purpose of this study is to examine the relationship or the extent to which the relationship between teacher and learner can and should be in the urban classroom. So this study utilizes content analysis to examine the role of the hashtag disrupt text movement in challenging what is taught in the classroom and the extent to which what is taught can and should be determined by the students in some way. In other words, this study seeks to examine the importance of the relationship between student and teacher in the selection of classroom literature and the extent to which the hashtag disrupt text movement has impacted that relationship and therefore has impacted the actual literature being taught in the English language arts classroom. Schools in the United States have increasingly changed in demographics, while the people who teach those students have not changed. It has been an ongoing trend for nearly 2 decades. While the total number of students in American public schools has risen, the percentage of those students who are white has steadily fallen. According to the Pew Research Center, in 1997, over 63% of the 46.1 million U.S. public school students were white. Today, white students comprise just 49.7% of the 50 million students enrolled. However, at the same time, 79% of public school teachers are white and non-Hispanic, according to the race and ethnicity of public school teachers and their students. Additionally, for some time, the English language arts classroom has been dominated by the historical canon of so-called great literature by mostly old white men who look nothing like the modern-day classroom. In 2016, a Twitter movement began called #DisruptTexts in response to the growing realization that students need diversity in their literature selections. At the same time, the National Council of Teachers of English issued their statement on racism, saying in part that it is the responsibility of English language arts teachers to be anti-racist educators, and that part of that work includes the selection of texts that they teach. In the ensuing 7 years since the #DisruptText movement began, schools have been under more and more arbitrary attacks related to classroom literature and library selections. It is clear that the needs of the learner are not prioritized by those attacks, but may have been prioritized because of movements like the #DisruptTexts movement, which might have had some impact on urban education, and a study of its effectiveness and the current status might yield insight into ideas for future movements. The assumption that students need to see themselves to engage in learning in their classrooms, and very few students have teachers who look like them. What else can be done to engage urban learners? And is a movement like the #DisruptText movement a step toward a solution? The main research question is, what, if any, has been the impact of the #DisruptText movement on the English language arts classroom? Secondary questions include what can be learned from the #DisruptText movement as a pattern for future possible movements, and all of this derives from the fundamental core question of what is the relationship between teacher and learner in the selection of texts. The research is a positivist content analysis of all writings about and from the #DisruptText movement from its foundation to the present day, to include the #DisruptText webpage and Twitter account, as well as any other sources that mention #DisruptText. The theory applied to this research is critical race theory, with a specific focus within that theory on the aspect of anti-racist pedagogy. There is, quite frankly, a abundance of literature analyzing what is taught in the English language arts classroom, who makes those choices, and in many instances advocating for some sort of change, although the veracity of those claims varies. So I will summarize the literature review for you by just pulling out a couple of significant quotes. First of all, the creator, arguably, of the anti-racist pedagogy theory, Gloria Ladson-Billings, She says, basically, in short, from a curriculum perspective, she explained that teachers should use their learning about students and families to construct, deconstruct, and reconstruct what is taught in schools, and also how that curriculum is taught. And basically, this is what I'm trying to communicate about the necessary impact of those students on what should be learned within their classroom. An author for Texas Monthly once said that the only book by a Latinx author I read in 12 years of public school was The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros in 7th grade, and it would be another 6 years before I read any other Latinx literature. That obviously is not okay. That is omitting or othering the students in our classrooms. And again, that's a student in Texas who did not get any authors that represented her culture. Basically, as an educator named Paige said, the curriculum reflects who and what is valued in our schools. If teachers and educators care about their students and the concepts of justice and fairness, for example, then what we teach matters and is fundamental. As Paige says, invisibility is in effect invalidation, and it makes our students feel invisible as well as unacceptable. I'll conclude this quick literature review summary by kind of reviewing what the statement of the National Council of Teachers of English said about the importance of being anti-racist educators. Basically, they said that it is the responsibility of teachers to apply the power of language and literacy to actively pursue justice and equity for all students and for the educators who serve them. And they go on to say that NCTE will pledge to continue their efforts to create equity inside of classrooms. But ultimately, they conclude by saying that as educators, we are poised to lead the way through our teaching, and that includes leading by being anti-racist educators. And part of that leading includes disrupting the canon and what is traditionally taught in English language arts classrooms. In conclusion, the #DisruptText movement began as this really onslaught of conversation about what is and should be taught in the English language arts classroom, and it kind of came out with a bang in 2016. At the time, there was a very active website, a very active Twitter presence. There were even book bags, English language arts teachers' favorite thing. Since that time, definitely the veracity of the movement has died down. However, it has maintained. If you are to look, you will find numerous opportunities where the four main founders have been very active, for example, presenting at conferences. They do maintain a blog on the National Council of Teachers English webpage and do maintain a web presence, although it is not as continuous and not as voracious as it once was. But they're still out there, and in YouTube you will find a lot of opportunities where the four main founders have been asked to speak. Also, of course, when you come out with anything voracious, you also bring on numerous detractors. It could be argued that the #DisruptText movement did in fact lead in part to the onslaught of attacks in public education from groups like Moms for Liberty and the anti-critical race theory folks. But they are not solely to blame, of course. There are some interesting detractors who call attention to some things that, anytime you are passionately speaking about something, as the four main founders have done, they call attention to the idea that there are elements of the #DisruptText movement that do seem to advocate for book banning, although the website very clearly says that they are not in favor of book banning and are, in fact, that they do not believe in censorship and have never supported banning books. This is in response to the fact that some of the main founders talked with an open focus about, for example, no longer teaching the Odyssey in their own English language arts classroom. Some detractors suggest, probably in a valid point, that the idea of this focusing on a diversity of text is not actually new, that actually the focus on diverse text has been an ongoing movement for about 20 years, and that this rich diversity has continued for quite some time. And I would argue that there's some validity to that, as I do study the research. The movement toward disrupting the text, if you will, There is literature to support that as far back as 1993, and the hashtag Disrupt Text movement did not actually begin until 2016. However, if the movement has been successful in anything, it's in maintaining our focus on making sure we're teaching the literature that actually looks like our students, and that we are paying attention to bringing in a myriad of opportunities and choices within the text selection. And that the hashtag Disrupt Text movement has been highly successful.